we are ready to kick ass and chew bubblegum. And oh my god, we ran out of bubblegum. I feel like everyone has been making that joke for ages. I'm so late to the party, am I right?
Patrick, can you shut the fuck up?
No! God, please, no!
Today we're gonna be talking about the Andy Warhol Diaries, which is a docuseries which was produced by Ryan Murphy and directed/written by Andrew Rossi. It is only 6 episodes, so it is one of those limited series. It is one of those limited series that just grabs your attention, keeps it there for not that long of a time, and then just goes away. I feel like Netflix has been thoroughly really good at giving us those kind of limited series. If you think back about The Haunting of Hill House, Midnight Mass, the very recent Inventing Anna, which I really enjoyed and really recommend if you like that kind of stuff.
I do not have time for this. I do not have time for you. Anna Delvey is a masterpiece, bitches. And they can just all...
I'm a cold piece looking for a Mr. Freeze.
They are really good at promoting this kind of work where you kind of get more time than a film to address all of the things that you want to, but you don't really stretch the narrative too much to the point that there are some episodes where you just feel like you just want to shoot yourself in the head because there is so much more interesting content to watch and you don't want to sit there. I really enjoyed the Andy Warhol Diaries. I was kind of surprised that no one was talking about it. I tried Googling it, I tried YouTubing it, as in YouTube searching it, and there was none of the people that I was following, but even among other less famous people, I didn't really see anyone who had an interesting look at the series itself. I don't know if it has to do with the fact that Andy Warhol is one of those people, is one of those characters and celebrities that we've talked about for ages. It is possible that maybe people didn't relate to that series in particular because it is a series for artists at the end of the day, even though it does go into a lot of interesting issues, talking about the AIDS epidemic, talking about the gay community living in New York in the 70s and in the 80s. At the end of the day, this is mostly about trying to understand an artist and specifically Andy Warhol.
Yeah, no shit, Sherlock.
I really enjoyed the series for a lot of different reasons, mostly because it feels very new, it feels very fresh in the way that a lot like the Velvet Underground documentary that came out last year. It kind of mixes a lot of formats together. There are some interviews from back then, there are some interviews that have been shot quite recently. Get to not only see people's perception of Warhol, but also people who knew Warhol, and we can also validate / contrast the things that he used to write about in his diary.
Pat said Andy chose people very well, in a sense, in that he chose people who could do things and had some qualities that he did not have.
And I feel like this is one of the most interesting looks that we've had at an artist that I've seen in a really long time, especially thinking about painters, thinking about photographers, thinking about those kind of mixed media artists who really kind of like knock down a lot of different walls when it comes to pop culture. I feel like Andy Warhol is one of those artists that is loved by mainstream people and it is loved by other artists.
Why did you decide to do pets?
Well, I got tired of doing people.
Did you?
Yeah.
I love you, dog!
Just because he used to talk about popular culture, he used to kind of put popular culture on a pedestal, saying, look at these soup cans, look at these superheroes, look at these famous icons, look at these brands, look at these commercials. All of this stuff that you see on an everyday basis, it does matter, it does hold some kind of artistic importance. And here, just because I'm presenting it to you, now you can actually appreciate it and understand it in a different way. And that's probably why Andy Warhol as a person was so interesting to look at.
Yeah. Then somebody can just, it'd be like a store and they just come in and ask you for a can of soup and that was just the easiest way to do something. Because everybody paints the same picture over and over again anyway, so.
I studied Andy Warhol when I was in film school, mostly through his videography work and all the stuff that he did at the factory. So a lot of avant-garde stuff. For example, I still remember discovering the short film Empire for the first time, where he literally shoots, I think, the top of the Empire State Building for like 24 hours, if I'm not mistaken. And that's it. There is nothing else happening. He just did that. Kind of embracing the slow cinema, that kind of movement where it is a very militant and active form of art, where it kind of challenges the viewers to look at something very uneventful, to take the time and take everything in contrast with capitalism and with a very fast industrialization, fast food, and all the kind of stuff that was going on in America around that time. And it was just fascinating to look at. I love the fact that there is also some reenactment. I've actually studied a bit of reenactment back in film school as well, especially reenactment used for documentary purposes. And I really loved how they used it here, because when we are listening to Andy Warhol's voice, which, by the way, another really cool and weird thing, it has been interpreted by... Oh, my computer went to sleep. Why do you go to sleep? Why? Why do you go to sleep when I'm clearly doing something important? Think about Andy Warhol. Come on, computer.
Why are you the way that you are?
I don't care if I don't know the password. You should still let me in. I wanted to know the name of the person who voiced Andy's AI, which is Bill Irwin, and I don't really know exactly how they did it, but it is a fascinating process. Very often when it comes to generating voices, like for example you would do at the cinema, it is kind of the same thing where you were trying to CGI someone's face, where basically you feed in a lot of information at a computer. So when it comes to recreating someone's voice, I suppose it would be mostly interviews or recordings of that person's voice, and then the computer tried to recreate it to the best capabilities that it can, and then they morphed it together, I think, with Bill Irwin's voice, and the result is kind of a weird, like robotic and magnetic voice, which kind of sounds like Andy Warhol, but also sounds like something that sounds fake.
I went down to the office because they were making a robot of me.
But you really get adjusted to it, you really get accustomed to the idea that you're actually listening to a fake voice of Andy Warhol. And at the end of the day, it really worked beautifully within the docuseries, because it really felt like he was being finally able to tell his story. And then if we link it back to the reenactment scenes I was talking about before, if you add all of those AI generated voices that sound exactly like Andy, paired with reenactment scenes that really play with shallow focus and with the depth of field, and with the fact that you're never actually showing the actors' faces, you only see parts of their bodies, parts of their movements to kind of fill in the gaps of the things they were being told in the diaries themselves. It really feels like a very tragic story that is told by the artist himself, even though he's not really here anymore. And at the end of the day, that's exactly what creates a very special emotional journey for the audience themselves.
There were so many people with cameras. It was so shocking. It hurt physically. And it hurt that nobody had warned me.
I don't know if you know, but the Andy Warhol Diaries is a book that has been edited by another person, and that person there, basically Andy Warhol used to call her up on the phone and tell her things that was going on in his life, and she would type everything down, and then she edited that book and she put it out there. And that's actually what Andy Warhol's wish was. It was that his diary would be published at some point. At least those are what the claims are, and at the end of the day, I'm not really surprised that Andy Warhol would do something like that, because he seems to be one of those artists that desperately tried to transform everything that they did into art, whether it is his public persona, so the way that, for example, he used to wear a wig for the most part of his life, actually, the way that he dressed, that he presented, the way that he talked to people, the way that also he didn't talk and that he was very silent. He really thought about exactly what to say, you know, when it comes to interviews, and he would be very subversive as well. And I feel like he's the perfect representation of living your life as an artist and trying to transform everything you do into art. I've described discovered a lot of things. For example, the fact that Andy Warhol used to be friends with a lot of really famous artists and that they collaborated on a lot of different things. I really loved the chapter on Basquiat and all the work that they did together, how they collaborated and how they motivated each other and made each other better in different ways. Also, funny enough, thanks to this documentary here, I kind of discovered a lot of things about Basquiat himself that I didn't know, because it is an artist that I've never studied. One thing that I really liked about this docuseries is the way that by desperately trying to give us an intimate look at Warhol, it almost transcends the genre of the documentary style, because documentaries tend to be very objective, or documentaries tend to be very disconnected from the person that they're trying to tell the story of. But at the end of the day, this docuseries really felt like it was Andy Warhol who was pulling the strings from the past, and it was actually quite incredible. And I loved how they managed to show us that this person, from a very young age, he was desperately trying to be loved by everyone.
Do you work hard? I mean, I suspect...
Well, I just work all the time.
All the time? I suspect a lot of people think you maybe just snap a few Polaroids, blow them up and splash a bit of paint on, but...
What the fuck? What the fuck is wrong with you? What the fuck is wrong with you?
Okay.
I feel like he was someone who didn't really have a high self-esteem of himself, even though everyone loved him. And it was probably something incredibly hard for him as well, because I loved when in some interviews and in some of the diary entries as well, he talks about the fact that for sometimes he wouldn't be able to produce any kind of artistic work, and he would kind of lose that sense of legitimacy when it comes to being portrayed as a successful artist. And that's the most relatable thing ever when it comes to artists, when you think about it. This idea of just because you're not producing any new work in the last 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, and maybe people keep praising your work and saying, oh, I love what you do, what are you working on right now, what's your next project, and you have blank slate, you have not ideas whatsoever. You have that kind of imposter syndrome that is very common actually nowadays among people.
Andy, do you feel that the public has insulted your art?
No.
Why not?
Well, I hadn't thought about it.
It doesn't bother you at all, then?
No.
Well, do you think that they've shown a lack of appreciation for what pop art means?
No.
Damn, boy. Damn, boy, he's thick. Boy, that's a thick-ass boy. Damn.
And it was just incredibly refreshing to see such a big artist go through that as well. And like when I was writing my notes when it comes to this series, I was like, there is a sense of infinite sadness that comes out of this series here, that comes out of every single episode.
I wonder if it's possible to have a love affair that lasts forever. If you're married for 30 years and you're cooking breakfast for the one you love, and he walks in, does your heart skip a beat?
And I love the fact that it doesn't really allow you just to tell the story of Andy Warhol through his periods in a way that it kind of feels like you're going through a lecture, kind of feels like you're being told just someone's life step by step. For example, recently, The Eyes of Tammy Faye, a film that actually received 1 or 2 Oscars if I'm not mistaken as well. That biopic there is actually a really good example of what I don't really enjoy often when it comes to documentaries or biopics. The fact that they desperately need to follow a chronology of these people's lives, because that is the only spectrum that they understand the life of that specific person, because they have not found any interesting way of telling that story that was not linked to a Wikipedia page at the end of the day. There is a biopic, for example, that I really enjoyed, and that's Spencer. I really enjoyed Spencer because it didn't really feel like we were just going through a very strict guideline and timeline of what was going on when it came to Princess Diana's life. It just felt like we got to know her at a very intimate level, at a very specific moment of her life. And those are the kind of biopics that I love, and this is exactly what I felt when it comes to the Andy Warhol Diaries.
There was a boy, a very strange, enchanted boy.
That's a thick-ass boy!
I really loved this idea of an artist desperately trying to reconnect to some kind of realness, you know? Just because when artists get that big because of all the incredible amount of work that he's produced across the years. We kind of lose a sense of what the person is like. And I love the fact that he desperately wanted people to understand what he was going through.
I think about doing portraits. And do I really care if they look good? Or is it just a job? And that's just a superficial thing. It's not life and death. Really, what is life about? You get sick and die. That's it.
And I really felt that he wanted us to understand what it felt like to be him and what it felt like from his perspective when other artists were taking advantage of him, or other artists didn't want to portray the same love that he wanted to give them out in the open. And for him it felt like the worst rejection possible, but at the same time, in the most human way possible, Andy Warhol couldn't really stop loving those people. You can't really stop loving someone just because they won't love you back in the same way that you want them to.
What's your last name, sweetheart?
Basquiat.
Yeah, I thought it was sweetheart.
There's a lot of affection there, even though in the diaries and other places he says horrible things about Basquiat.
I'm trying to keep this as spoiler-free as possible, even though if you really know Andy Warhol's life, I'm pretty sure that you know of who I'm talking about specifically, just because I really recommend the series and I want you to give a look at it. Of course, just because of how clever and articulate Andy Warhol was, within the diaries themselves, there are so many beautiful one-liners and quotes. I don't believe in death because you're not around to see it, so for me it didn't happen. And it really gives you an idea of what Andy Warhol was going through, especially when it comes to the attempt murder that happened to him in the 60s as well when he was shot, and how basically that impacted him and his art for the rest of his life. And of course, this also reflects the way of how he dealt with the AIDS epidemic. He dealt with some of the artists that he used to go around slowly disappearing, slowly going away.
Before AIDS, it really was a time of freedom and amazing ability to just experiment and all. And then when AIDS came in, it really changed how everyone looked at sex.
I wouldn't be surprised if they started putting gays in concentration camps. All the fags will have to get married so they won't have to go away to camps. It will be like for a green card.
Or being addicted to certain drugs and slowly killing themselves. And Warhol just not having any control on this kind of stuff and feeling completely powerless. I really love the fact that at the end of the day, this docuseries here doesn't only looks at Andy Warhol, but also at other people who surrounded him. And they kind of give us a bit of resolution when it comes to some of his ex-partners, for example, giving us a look at what they have been through after that their relationship stopped.
I think he would be proud of his relationship with Andy, especially now. You know, he's like so many people. He's part of the story of our changing culture to acceptance. He's part of that story.
I really love that because very often when you have docuseries or biopic focusing on exactly one person, you end up almost like distorting the truth to the point that you're just deifying this person here. If you think about the movie Bohemian Rhapsody, that is a really good example where you just have a feeling that that movie was just about one person and not about Queen themselves.
I'm a fan of Freddie Mercury and Queen. I'm a fan of my mom. She's got my back. I'm a fan of chamomile tea. At
the end of the day, it is almost impossible to define whether one person is good or bad, but it is a really good attempt, in my opinion, of trying to understand who Andy Warhol was at the most human level.
I looked down at my body and I was afraid of it. The scars were all so fresh. They were sort of pretty though.
And I also really loved the final few chapters of this docuseries where we actually start wondering how much of these diary entries were actually manufactured from Warhol perspective to be sure that he would be perceived as the good guy in the story and that some people would be perceived more as the villain / the enemies of Andy Warhol. And it does work like that in a lot of this show's structure when you think about it. There are some people who feel like villains, who feel like people who are just in Andy Warhol's way. And it's really cool because you kind of see Andy Warhol making a lot of different mistakes. You're sitting there from like an outside perspective being like, no, don't do that. Come on, he's never gonna love you the way that you want to be loved. Just move along and find someone who can love you the way that you want to be loved, you know?
Andy was a master at creativity, and when it was, I guess, in his relationship with John, here and there, he had to create tension and excitement.
I really like the fact that, for example, in the last few chapters, they tried to address the fact that this book wasn't really written by Andy Warhol as much as it was edited by Pat Hackett. And there are some people who actually ask her questions, being like, did you leave anything out? How can we believe that this is exactly what Warhol told you and that you didn't, for example, censor some of it, and that you didn't change the book so it would portray him in the way that we expect him to be portrayed?
Jed did stay in Andy's bedroom. Always, yeah. I think maybe it was Pat's own way of avoiding the truth.
And I really love that, for example, she says something along the lines of course, Andy Warhol didn't really stop me to type certain things, but it was clear that at some point there were some things that we decided that we would keep just for ourselves, and that I will be bringing them to my grave, and that even if people ask me, I will not really answer them directly. And that felt like a very genuine thing, you know. Then it is really hard to tell where lies the truth. When it comes to documentaries, that's always the kind of like the core. Where is the truth? How can we define the real truth? And who is telling the truth? How many versions of the truth can you actually tell in just 6 episodes of screen time? Truth is something that is so incredibly volatile and that has so many different facets, and it's almost impossible to reach the core of what a certain truth is. But I really felt that this gave us something that felt very original, that felt very new, and I feel like if you're an artist, you're definitely gonna dig that. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but a good companion piece to this docuseries here would be the Velvet Underground documentary, because here they don't really speak a lot about his relationship with the Velvet Underground, maybe because they knew that the film was gonna be made around the same time. So if you like limited series, give it a look. Even if you don't like documentary series, I can tell you that, like Inventing Anna, this is a very intimate look at his life, and it feels like you try to relate to a lot of different real people / characters. So don't worry about it, it's not very objective. It is a kind of deep descent into Andy Warhol's persona, into the character of Andy Warhol, and trying to take all of these things away to try to shine light into something more genuine. And it's really beautiful at the end of the day.
I'd given John a rabbit puppet, and he was waving at people with it. And someone yelled "gay boy" at me. And that was funny.
But anyways, I really hope that you enjoyed this video. Let me know down in the comments if you watched the Andy Warhol Diaries, if you're gonna watch it now just because of my video. That would be a huge compliment, actually, now that I think about it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Every single like that you drop will go in appreciation of other queer artists who used to work around the same time as Andy Warhol, if you think about Basquiat or Keith Haring, for example. I'm Patrick, and this is Torn Apart.
I don't believe in death, because you're not around to know that it happened. I always think people go uptown. They just go to the department store and they're coming back the same afternoon, or you just keep waiting for them.
The funeral's on April Fool's Day at St. Patrick's.